Check this out, 598 cubic inches. We've got low buck versus high buck. We got screaming horsepower versus brute torque. It's all on this episode of Engine Masters. This is Engine Masters presented by AMSOIL, and this is another one of those episodes where I am personally completely stoked because this is gonna be cool. I've got a 598 cubic inch short block, and we're gonna show you two completely different combinations on it, one of which is like low buck and super low end torquey, and the other one which is high buck and has horsepower that you will not believe for an engine with a 10-to-1 compression ratio. All right, let's give you the big picture here. This is a big block Chevrolet. They came out in 1965. They're still super popular for drag racing, great for trucks. You see them in a lot of Chevelles and Novas and things like that. But the days of having a 454 big block and thinking you're cool are kind of waning. Let's be honest, it's over. Because everybody's got a 496 or a 540 or a 555. Not everybody has a 598. Now, what makes this thing cool is that it is a short block that you can buy out of the box with a warranty from Blueprint Engines. It's a new product. I talked them into making. They had this 598, 725 horsepower crate engine, but by selling just the short block, it means that you can use the cylinder head package that you want to do and make it cheap or high end, like you'll see in this episode. What makes the 598 great is that it is a low deck block. It's a stock production block deck height. It's 9.8 inches. Often if you're shopping for huge cubic inches in a big block Chevy, like a 572 or a 632, it's a tall deck, 10.2 inches. The problem with that is you can't use the parts off of your existing big block. You need to buy a different intake manifold. They often take different headers. It doesn't fit in the car as good. You're not gonna fit a brake booster, stuff like that. Whereas this one will take all your stock components. Here's what I've done. The camshaft is a super cheap hydraulic flat tappet. It's a Comp Cams XE274. The cylinder heads are a regular production Chevrolet iron rectangle port. They came off a Gen 5 crate motor. There's nothing special about them. Go to the swap meet, you're a chump if you pay more than $500 or $800 for them. The intake manifold is a used Edelbrock Performer RPM dual plane, and up top, I also went to the bottom of the budget pile. The Brawler line of carburetors is a new thing from Holley Performance, and they're Chinese parts. They're assembled and tested in the United States. They're just like a Holley configuration. This thing at Summit is $415, which is like half the price of the carburetors we normally use. This one's an 850 double pumper, and we've been pretty happy with it. So that just makes a really low buck way to put together a pretty impressive engine. The problem is it's strangling airflow and it's not gonna make killer horsepower, but I think it's gonna be incredibly impressive on the torque curve. So now we gotta go hang the thing on the dyno, lube it up with some AMSOIL, and find out if I completely fumbled this or if I am a hero with this low buck combo. What do you think? We'll find out right now. In this episode, we're gonna build this engine into two radically different combos. And one of my points is to show you that you can buy a short block like this and do all kinds of different things with it, but that doesn't mean you're gonna use the same oil. And this time I've got a three-way cocktail of AMSOIL to tell you about. First of all, our base combination has a flat tappet camshaft in it, so you have to break it in with break-in oil, and that's what this AMSOIL product is right here. We've actually already done that, but I wanted to make sure that you did not forget that that is a critical step. Now, in the first combination here, this thing is gonna be running at pretty low RPM. It's gonna be like a typical hot rod engine that you would just use on weekends and things. And for that, I'm gonna use the Z-Rod 1030. The important thing being, this is a high zinc oil. Once again, that is critical for the flat tappet camshaft. Now, when we go into the next combination with this engine, it's gonna be running much more extreme RPM. It's gonna be making a lot more horsepower. And at that point, it's more of a race engine, and I'm gonna move to the Dominator racing oil, but in the same 1030 rating. Right now, we're gonna sauce it up with that Z-Rod before we go to the very first dyno test and prove to these guys that this is actually a good idea. Have you ever run anything like this?
No.
Not on purpose.
No, never on purpose.
Never on purpose.
Actually, never accidentally either. I mean,
Well, you see it all the time with small blocks with stock heads and a little cam or something, but it's the 598 cubes that makes this weird and good.
yeah, puts it completely out of that range of normalcy.
What's your opinion?
I'm gonna wait and see, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably the smart thing to do.
I'm going to reserve commentary until I see it.
What that really means is, I don't know.
Yes.
You look like you really like it, Brule.
Watch this. Run it. What do you think?
What did it make peak? I didn't look at the horsepower number.
Roughly 715 pound-feet and 540 horsepower.
Wow.
Look at this. It's making peak horsepower at 4,700 RPM.
Wow.
That's way, way below what you would expect. So we're looking at a torque peak of 714.3 pound-feet at 3,500 and 545 horsepower at 4,700. Now, 545 horsepower is pathetic for a 598 cubic inch engine, right?
Well, it's not even 1 horsepower per cubic inch.
Exactly. It's completely, it sucks. But look at this. It makes virtually 700 pound-feet, 688 pound-feet at 2,500 RPM.
That's what makes it a diesel.
Right.
Yeah.
And then look, it's flat. It makes more than 700 all the way to 4,000 essentially. I also think if a guy already has a 454 in his Chevelle and he's running around with a turbo 400 and like a stock 308 rear gear, all he needs is this short block, throw it into his existing parts, and it will be really fast without having to spend extra money on overdrive, because this kind of torque can pull a highway rear gear and still be really fast. And when it starts smoking the tires, it will never stop.
No.
Ever. It'll just keep going.
What's kind of cool about this illustration is it just shows you how low you can go. And you can just keep moving everything up if you want by just kind of changing camshaft up to a point with this cylinder head. There's a lot of room to move the engine speed up.
You
Yeah.
think so?
Change things. I think with this head, you can still move it up some. It's never going to be a 7,000 RPM motor with this many cubic inches in this head, but maybe you could get it to 5,500 for peak power or something. I mean, I still think it would move everything up if it had like a 248 at 50 camshaft.
If you did that, would it make significantly more than 545 horsepower, or is 550-ish the limit of an 850 and this intake and those cylinder heads?
Yeah, cylinder head, we'd have to look at the flow number on those heads, but it may be getting close.
If you move the peaks up, you'll move the horsepower up too.
But not necessarily.
It can shorten the difference between peak
Right.
torque and peak power, because once that head's saturated, I mean, if that head flows 320 or 330, how much power can it make? I mean, theoretically, it
that
says
good.
it makes 660 or something, but I think this head, if I remember right, it flows about a CFM per cc, so I'm thinking it's around 310-ish.
Okay.
That's not too bad, actually. So you should make over 600 horsepower cam to take maximum advantage of flow.
So it could, but then it would start to give up this torque curve, and it's not going to idle at 800 RPM. It's not going to have 17 inches of vacuum.
It'll still make that torque potentially, but it's not going to have all that drivability and smooth idle and, all that stuff way down low.
It is absolutely the argument and the example of a torque motor versus a horsepower motor, which is what I'm trying to do here. And I think when people say, oh, it's a torque motor, what they really mean is that it makes more torque than horsepower. And that's what this is to the extreme. What makes this strange is that the power peak is below 5,252 RPM, so therefore it makes way less horsepower than torque, because the formula for horsepower is torque times RPM divided by 5252. So horsepower takes into account engine speed and torque does not. Torque is a measurement of basically work, how strong you are. And this thing is really, really strong down here. There's no replacement for displacement, right?
I like it.
How about more airflow with displacement?
Well, that
We
did.
find that one
That's
out.
step 2.
Okay.
Ready to wrench?
Yeah.
I don't think the Steves were completely convinced about the coolness of my low buck engine package, probably because it peaked horsepower at 4,700 RPM, which is ridiculous, and partially because they know what's coming, which is this. a combination that is much more in line than the stuff we're used to dealing with to make big, high-end horsepower. So what we're gonna do here is swap the cam and the cylinder heads and the intake manifold and the carburetor. We're gonna use the same short block, same oil pan, but totally change the character of the engine, and we're gonna do it with Brodix cylinder heads, which I haven't used in a while, and I'm really looking forward to it because we've all been just drooling on this cylinder head as we look at it. This is a Brodix BP BB3 Plus O. Now the O means that it is an oval port. If you look at the shape of this port, it's not a perfect rectangle like a conventional big block Chevy rectangle port, but don't let that fool you, because those heads that we just tested, the iron ones, they're like 310 or 312 cc's volume on the inlet runner. These are 365. This head is advertised to flow 450 CFM at 800 valve lift. That's ludicrous for what this is. It has a 2.350-inch intake valve. And the CNC port work on this thing looks amazing. It'll take 800 thousandths lift from the factory. Now, what makes this so cool though, is that it uses a conventional valve train. Many times when you're shopping for big end trick big block Chevy heads, or for any race engine, they require a dedicated shaft rocker system. This one does not. As a matter of fact, we're gonna use the same Crane Gold rockers that we use on the other combination. So that's cool. What's also neat is that Brodix sells an intake manifold that is made exactly for these inlet ports. You can see they've got the same shape to them, and they also port matched them. So this is like a sweet combination of a giant single plane manifold, custom designed for this intake. Up top, this carburetor is a Holley Dominator in 1250 CFM. I figured we were gonna need a lot of airflow to feed this 598 cubic inch engine. Now lastly, we changed the camshaft. What we had in it before was a hydraulic flat tappet, and now of course, we've got the solid mechanical roller camshaft. It is from Crane. It's a custom grind cam specified by Steve Brule, and so you can't just get a catalog part number for it. You have to order it special. If you want to duplicate our combo, this is an R-274/4334-2S-10. Now that 10 means it's on a 110-degree lobe separation angle. The duration at 50 thousandths tap at lift on this thing is 274, 284, and the lift is in the neighborhood of 0.730 inches. So it is a pretty big, healthy Crane solid roller camshaft in this thing. So now you know exactly what our engine combination is here. You can duplicate it yourself. The question is, do you want to? Well, we'll find out when we look at the horsepower numbers, and I gotta tell you, we have one Achilles heel. That is the compression ratio. The pistons in that blueprint short block are gonna give us 10.0 to 1. Honestly, we've all talked about it. We'd like to see 11.5 to 1 with this deal to run on pump gas, but I think it's still gonna be really strong. We won't know until we go in the cell, bolt all this stuff to the 598, and make a pull in anger and cross our fingers for 800 plus horsepower. Steve's setting the initial lash on the valves. I'm gonna test fit the intake. This thing is gonna be sweet. And it fits perfectly. But we wanna run a vacuum pump on this thing instead of running a bead of silicone. We're gonna have to figure out some cork. What Steve's working on right now is what's called a stud girdle. So it uses a really long poly lock, which is the thing that holds the rocker arm down. And it is a clamp that goes around each one of those poly locks to stabilize all of these rocker studs so that they're not wobbling around with the high spring pressure and big lift and potentially RPM of a solid roller cam. This thing doesn't really have an RPM problem, fortunately, but this is still gonna add valve train stability since we don't have a trick like shaft mounted rocker. It's a regular old stud rocker. This is the same rocker we took off that other engine on the stock heads. Does yours go right?
How big is your Dominator?
1250.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Why'd you put the small one on? They make a 1420.
I asked you, you wanted this one.
Yeah.
Well, the old one was the Freiberger combo, this is the Brulio combo.
I like the Brulio combo way better.
Probably. So
Yeah.
we got the whole Brodix setup dialed. Steve Brule is now going to tune this thing up while we go hide in the corner, and then we'll come back and find out how much power this thing makes. All right, I think you guys are about to be a lot happier with this engine.
It's a little more what I'm normally doing.
I know.
I suspect I'll like it a lot better too.
This thing's going to be stout. Watch this.
You're the odd man out, Freiberger.
I know. That's more stout than I expected by quite a bit. I didn't think 10-to-1 compression ratio would get us there. So essentially we just bolted on 300 horsepower.
That would be a cover blurb.
Yeah, I know. Not even essentially, we did just bolt on 300 horsepower.
Almost exact, actually a little better than 3.
So this thing just made 774.9 pound-feet of torque, and up top, 853 horsepower at 6,300 RPM. Now, what blows my mind actually is how much more torque it made than the small combo. It just bumped it up. But look how flat it is. What's it making down here at 4,500?
About 774.
Yeah, 762. Yeah. So a lot of people will look at that, I think, who are not familiar with these types of things and go, oh, well, this made more torque, so this is more the torque engine. But the whole key is the RPM range at which it happens.
Even down at 3,600, it still made 673, so that is a beast.
So that's the overlay of the iron heads versus the Brodix top end combo. These red lines down here are what we did with the tiny camshaft and stock heads. And look at that. That is what's going on. But this is a real visual that tells you that even though this is making way more torque, I think when people think of a torque motor, they're thinking of torque that is easily drivable at low RPM at throttle
Torque
position.
at lower engine speeds, not at max output of torque.
I know you guys think I was cracked walking into this test, but what my goals were for it were first to find out what happens if you basically put 454 parts on a 598, and second to talk about the difference in a torque motor and a horsepower motor, and it backfired on me a little bit that the horsepower motor also made more torque. But what are your takeaways from this? I mean, there's more engine dynamics going on here than we've really talked about. What has it made you think about?
Well, like you were saying, I do a lot of this stuff. The high horsepower stuff. The low horsepower thing makes me start thinking about all of those things, intake manifold. I mean, it almost makes me want to go put the other combination back on and order 6 camshafts and 6 intake manifolds and a couple of cylinder heads just to try and really get that up and kind of take that other viewpoint of everything.
Yep. How about you?
It tells me that the torque motor thing is just bogus. Guys will talk about, oh, it's a torque motor when they don't make any horsepower, but torque is horsepower and RPM. Like you'll see guys with a 6-cylinder saying, oh, well, it makes a ton of torque, but it really doesn't.
The inline 6 is better than the V8 for torque.
Yeah.
It's not.
Which one makes more torque? I mean, our high horsepower engine makes more torque because it takes a lot of torque and RPM to make that kind of really good horsepower, so.
Yeah.
I think the one really obvious thing is cubic inches make more torque.
Well, there is no replacement for displacement.
Exactly.
And oftentimes when we say something like that online, people go, yes, there is turbo. Well, what happens when you put a turbo on this?
Yeah.
Put 15 pounds on this and there's 1,400 pound-feet of torque.
But let's talk about the diminishing returns of displacement also. In other words, friction. The piston speed in this thing is ridiculous because of that 4.5-inch stroke.
It starts to take its toll, particularly in higher engine speeds. I've seen combinations of 632s where 615 with a little shorter stroke actually made more horsepower and less torque because of the friction losses in the longer stroke. So gas mileage, that's another one.
Yeah.
Tow rig thing, I mean, it's just not gonna make the mileage a diesel does.
And it tells you that you are obligated to spend a lot of money on cylinder heads if you really want to be somebody, as this is evidenced. I mean, that's iron head versus pretty high-end trick stock valve arrangement big block head.
Yeah, that's a standard 24-degree head, bolts on like most stuff, but boy, is that a really nice cylinder head and intake combo.
Sure. But to conclude the whole thing, I guess my takeaways are one short block can really do it all. People think that you gotta be really specialized to make kind of 800 horsepower. The same short block does that. And yeah, I guess if you're making the lower end power, you could save a lot of money with a cast crank, high protected pistons, all that other kind of stuff. This has all got forged good parts in it, but there's nothing inherently different about the short block between low horsepower and high, you know, when you're dealing with a 598. And just to lock down this point, we're actually running this thing on Rocket brand 91 octane fuel. Made 850 horsepower and 775 pound-feet on Rocket brand with an engine that I would argue anybody can slap together, because you buy that short block from Blueprint, you get that top end from Brodix, and it runs.
It's all there. It's available to bolt on.
Well, it's a weird episode, but it's still one of my favorites because I still dig this little motor.
I like the
Yeah, it's a
598.
big block. Yeah, the 598 is just all win. There's no downside. So Steve, how do you like my iron head combo?
Man, I don't want you to take this as criticism, because I really mean it, but I mean for a dump truck or a garbage truck or something like that, it's really, really good. All that torque.
I know it's a little hard to actually stand up for it sitting in front of this 850 horsepower at 10-to-1 compression.
This is brilliant. I really like this combo a lot.
I know it. I'm thinking these heads are really good.
I know, the whole thing is. It worked together really well. The single plane didn't kill bottom end torque. And as a matter of
How
fact,
can it? It's 598 cubic inches.
which brings me to the next thing. I mean, let's talk about torque, because that's always a topic people talk about. Oh, my engine makes a lot of torque, usually when it's a dud on horsepower.
Well, and that's actually what I wanted to get into when we even did this episode, is the whole horsepower versus torque conversation. And I think it's, again, people don't understand what you just said. A torque motor is an engine that makes more torque than horsepower, like my iron head combo.
Right.
But you can make more torque with a killer race motor like this. It's just at higher RPM where you don't want to deal with driving it every day.
Yeah, horsepower is torque and RPM, so.
Well, torque is horsepower.
Yeah.
Times RPM divided by 5252.
Oh, thanks for educating me.
Okay, so Brule wants to turn this into 900 horsepower on pump gas.
That's practically there.
I know it.
A little more compression, a little more cam, and you've got 900. Maybe
I
a
think he
carb-
can do it.
Carb spacer.
And if we do, what do you think's gonna happen?
You'll see it on a future episode of Engine Masters.
Not bad, Dulcich.
Yeah,
You
really?
forgot one thing.
What?
Presented by AMSOIL. See?
Oh, yeah.
Gotta
That's
go.
why you're a pro. I'm the sidekick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I pay the bills. The engine, like, character, the fact that it idles really slowly with a lot of vacuum, it's super smooth, it's just totally drivable.
That's like the not so pretty girl that you can live with, right?
What's so not so pretty about it? I like it.
You know, I mean, yeah, she's got all that friendly torque and all that, and easy to live with, but just not that exciting.